Hello, and welcome back to our audiobooks with commentary. Today we're going to be reading the Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft. And it's been a while since I've read the Dunwich Horror, so I don't remember if this is one of Lovecraft's more problematic stories. As hopefully everybody knows right now, Lovecraft was a genius when it came to writing horror, but also a wuss who was afraid of salads and really racist and classist. So we are going to be kind of editing as we go along because a lot of his stories uses terminology that I'm not comfortable with. But here we are. We're going to try reading the Dunwich Horror. I do really like Lovecraft stuff, and it's unfortunate that he was kind of a dick. The Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft. When a traveler in north-central Massachusetts takes the wrong fork at the junction of the Arlesbury Pike just beyond Dean's Corners, he comes upon a lonely and curious country. The ground gets higher, and the briar-bordered stone walls press closer and closer against the ruts of the dusty, curving road. The trees of the frequent forest belts seem too large, and the wild weeds, brambles, and grasses attain a luxuriousness not often found in settled regions. At the same time, the planted fields appear singularly few and barren, while the sparsely scattered houses wear a surprisingly uniform aspect of age, squalor, and dilapidation. Without knowing why, one hesitates to ask directions from the gnarled, solitary figures spied now and then on crumbling doorsteps, or in the sloping rock-strewn meadows. Those figures are so silent and furtive that one feels somehow confronted by forbidden things with which it would be better to have nothing to do. When a rise in the road brings the mountains in view above the deep woods, the feeling of strange uneasiness is increased. The summits are too rounded and symmetrical to give a sense of comfort and naturalness, and sometimes the sky silhouettes with a special clearness the queer circles of tall stone pillars with which most of them are crowned. Gorges and ravines of problematical depth intersect the way, and the crude wooden bridges always seem of dubious safety. When the road dips again, there are stretches of marshland that one instinctively dislikes, and indeed almost fears at evening when unseen whippoorwills chatter and the fireflies come out in abnormal profusion to dance to the raucous, creepily insistent rhythms of stridently piping bullfrogs. The thin, shining line of the Miskatonic's upper reaches has an oddly serpent-like suggestion as it winds close to the feet of the doomed hills among which it rises. As the hills draw nearer, one heeds their wooded sides more than their stone-crowned tops. Those sides loom up so darkly and precipitously that one wishes they would keep their distance, but there is no road by which to escape them. Across a covered bridge one sees a small village huddled between the stream and the vertical slope of Round Mountain, and wonders at the cluster of rotting gambrel roofs bespeaking an earlier architectural period than that of the neighboring region. It is not reassuring to see, on a closer glance, that most of the houses are deserted and falling to ruin, and that the broken steepled church now harbors the once slovenly mercantile establishment of the hamlet. One dreads to trust the tenebrous tunnels of the bridge, yet there is no way to avoid it. Once across, it is hard to prevent the impression of a faint, malign odor about the village street, as of the massed mold and decay of centuries. It is always a relief to get clear of the place, and to follow the narrow road around the base of the hills and across the level country beyond till it rejoins the Aylesbury Pike. Afterward, one sometimes learned that one has been through Dunwich. I'm going to pause here, just because that was a mouthful of scenery description. You know, it's always interesting to see how style has evolved, because if you submitted this to an anthology or a magazine today, I guarantee you they would reject it just because that was way too much scenery description and dialogue. It's really interesting having been through the whole song and dance of trying to get short stories published. But it's just like, people want things to start immediately. They want action, and they don't want you to set the scene the way that it does in a lot of these older stories. I blame modern cinema, frankly. It's so, it's good, but we're a bit more of an action-packed society than we once were. Just my personal opinion. Back to it. This is chapter 1, by the way. I should have said that initially, but we're keeping things casual here. Outsiders visit Dunwich as seldom as possible, and since a certain season of horror, all the signboards pointing towards it have been taken down. The scenery, judged by an ordinary aesthetic canon, is more than commonly beautiful, yet there is no influx of artists or summer tourists. 2 centuries ago, when talk of witch blood, Satan worship, and strange forest presences was not laughed at, it was the custom to give reasons for avoiding the locality. In our sensible age, since the Dunwich Horror of 1928 was hushed up by those who had the town's and the world's welfare at heart, people shun it without knowing exactly why. Perhaps one reason, though it cannot apply to uninformed strangers, is that the natives are now repellently decadent, having gone far along that path of retrogression so common in many New England backwaters. They have come to form a race by themselves, and the well-defined mental and physical stigmata of degeneracy and inbreeding. The average of their intelligence is woefully low, whilst their annals reek of overt viciousness and of half-hidden murders, incests, and deeds of almost unnameable violence and perversity. The old gentry, representing the 2 or 3 Amadeus families which came from Salem in 1692, have kept somewhat above the general level of decay, though many branches are sunk into the sordid populace so deeply that only their names remain as a key to the origin they disgrace. Some of the Whateleys and bishops still send their eldest sons to Harvard and Miskatonic, though those sons seldom return to the moldering gambrel roofs under which they and their ancestors were born. No one, even those who have the facts concerning the recent horror, can say just what is the matter with Dunwich. The old legends speak of unhallowed rites and conclaves amidst which they call forbidden shapes of shadow out of the great rounded hills, and made wild orgastic prayers that were answered by loud crackings and rumblings from the ground below. In 1747, the Reverend Abijah Hoadley, newly come from the Congregational Church at Dunwich Village, preached a memorable sermon on the close presence of Satan and his imps, in which he said, "It must be allowed that these blasphemies of an infernal train of daemons are matters of too common knowledge to be denied. The cursed voices of Azazel and Bezriel, of Beelzebub and Belial, being heard from under the ground by above a score of credible witnesses now living. I myself did not more than a fortnight ago catch a very plain discourse of evil powers in the hill behind my house, wherein there were a rattling and rolling, groaning and screeching, hissing, such as no things of this earth could raise up, and which must needs have come from those craves that only black magic can discover, and only the devil unlock." Okay, I know he's trying to be spooky here, but also, it'd be funny if it was just a bunch of lads out behind there having fun. I don't know. I'm not necessarily always on the side of people who are going to be bigots about it. Okay. Mr. Hoadley disappeared soon after delivering this sermon, but the text, printed in Springfield, is still extant. Noises in the hills continue to be reported from year to year, and still form a puzzle to geologists and physiographers. I really hope that priest, went to go examine those things, and then just got taken up and found himself a nice goth girlfriend and just retired. Yeah, didn't do anything sordid. I'm sure they didn't kill him. I'm sure they didn't sacrifice him to the elder gods. That would be, bad. Other traditions, blah, 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 blah. For some reason, okay, I'll be honest with you, I am stumbling so much. There's something about the way that Lovecraft writes that it's such a tongue twister. It's worse than some of the Dr. Seuss stuff. Okay. Other traditions tell of foul odors near the hill crowning circles of stone pillars, and of rushing, airy presences to be heard faintly at certain hours from stated points at the bottom of the great ravines, while still others try to explain the devil's hoop yard, a bleak, blasted hillside where no tree, shrub, or grass blade will grow. Then, too, the natives are mortally afraid of the numerous whippoorwills, which grow vocal on warm nights. It is vowed that the birds are psychopomps lying in wait for the souls of the dying, and that they time their eerie cries in unison with the sufferer's struggling breath. If they can catch the fleeing soul when it leaves the body, they instantly flutter away chittering in demonic laughter, and if they fail, they subside gradually into a disappointed silence. Aren't psychopomps supposed to be a good thing, though? Aren't they supposed to, guide your soul to the afterlife? Lovecraft was so biased. I love whippoorwills. These tales, of course, are obsolete and ridiculous because they come down from very old times. Dunwich is indeed ridiculously old, older by far than any of the communities within 30 miles of it. South of the village, one may still spy the cellar walls and chimney of the ancient Bishop House, which was built before 1700, whilst the ruins of the mill at the Falls, built in 1806, form the most modern piece of architecture to be seen. Industry did not flourish here, and the 19th century factory movement proved short-lived. Oldest of all are the great rings of rough-hewn stone columns on the hilltops, but these are more generally attributed to Native Americans than to settlers. Okay, pause here for tea break. Blah, that was a lot to get through. You see what I mean, though, about, the telling rather than showing? That whole tell-don't-show thing. It's apparently modern. Today we are drinking delicious pearl jasmine tea that I am very bad at brewing, but enjoy nonetheless. And it's warm this time. I actually made it on purpose and didn't forget it. Okay, tea break over, chapter 2. Hopefully I will stumble less, though hopefully I'm going to edit out most of the stumbles, but here we are. It was in the township of Dunwich, in a large and partially inhabited farmhouse set against a hillside 4 miles from the village and 1.5 miles from any other dwelling, that Wilbur Whately was born at 5 a.m. on Sunday, the 2nd of February, 1913. This date was recalled because it was Candlemas, which the people in Dunwich curiously observe under another name, and because the noises in the hills had sounded, and all the dogs of the countryside had barked persistently throughout the night before. Less worthy of notice was the fact that the mother was one of the decadent Whateleys, a somewhat deformed, unattractive albino woman of 35, living with an aged and half-insane father about whom the most frightful tales of wizardry had been whispered in his youth. Lavinia Whately had no known husband, but according to the custom of the region, made no attempt to disavow the child, concerning the other side of whose ancestry the country folk might, and did, speculate as wildly as they chose. On the contrary, she seemed strangely proud of the dark, goatish-looking infant who formed such a contrast to her own sickly and pink albinism, and was heard to mutter many curious prophecies about its unusual powers and tremendous future. Lavinia was one who would be apt to mutter such things, for she was a lone creature given to wandering amidst thunderstorms in the hills and trying to read great odorous books which her father had inherited through 2 centuries of Whateleys, and which were fast falling to pieces with age and wormholes. She had never been to school, but was filled with disjointed scraps of ancient lore that old Whately had taught her. The remote farmhouse had always been feared because of old Whately's reputation for black magic, and the unexplained death by violence of Mrs. Whately when Lavinia was 12 years old, and had not helped to make the place popular. Isolated among strange influences, Lavinia was fond of wild and grandiose daydreams and singular occupations, nor was her leisure much taken up by household cares in the home from which all standards of order and cleanliness had long since disappeared. Okay, Lavinia sounds like a treat. I mean, I don't know why they called her deformed and unattractive. She's probably fine, considering that this whole thing has a skewed bias, but, she sounds awesome. I'd be her friend. And I mean, clearly somebody found her attractive, because, she had a monster baby. Okay. No, Lavinia is clearly best girl, it's been decided. There was a hideous screaming which echoed... Why is there a hideous screaming? Oh, wow, okay, yeah, that's a hot one. There was a hideous screaming which echoed above even the hill noises and the dogs barking on the night Wilbur was born, but no known doctor or midwife presided at his coming. Neighbors knew nothing of him until a week afterward, when old Whately drove his sleigh through the snow into Dunwich village and discoursed incoherently to the group of loungers at Osborne's general store. There seemed to be a change in the old man, an added element of furtiveness in the clouded brain which subtly transformed him from an object to a subject of fear, though he was not one to be perturbed by any common family event. Amidst it all he showed some trace of the pride later noticed in his daughter, and what he said of the child's paternity was remembered by many of his hearers years afterwards. Oh God, Lovecraft is doing the thing where he tries to write in accents. Ugh, why did people do this? Okay, I don't know what accent this is supposed to be. It's probably offensive because Lovecraft wrote it. I'm going to do my best here. I don't care what folks think. If Laveney's boy looked like his pa, he wouldn't look like nothing ye expect. Ye needn't think the only folks in the folks hereabout. Laveney's read some, and has seed some things the most ye only tell about. I calculate her man is as good a husband as ye can find this side of Aylesbury, and if ye knowed as much about the hills as I do, you wouldn't ask to no better church wedding nor hearing. Let me tell you something. Some day ye folks'll hear a child o' Laveney's a-callin' its father's name on top of Sentinel Hill. Damn it, Lovecraft. At least he's supportive of his daughter's monster. Yeah, clearly he's a proud dad, and I think they're a very happy family, and we shouldn't disturb them. And there's nothing sinister about them at all. The only person who saw Wilbur during the first month of his life were old Zachariah Whately of the Undecayed Whateleys. What does that mean? Okay, does that mean just the not poor versions? Damn it, Lovecraft. Okay. The only person who saw Wilbur during the first month of his life were old Zachariah Whately of the Undecayed Whateleys, and Earl Sarr's common-law wife, Mammy Bishop. Mammy's visit was frankly one of curiosity, and her subsequent tales did justice to her observations, but Zachariah came to lead a pair of Aldernery's cows which old Whately had bought off of his son Curtis. This marked the beginning of a course of cattle buying on the part of small Wilbur's family, which ended only in 1928, when the Dunwich Horror came and went. Yet at no time did the ramshackle Whately barn seem overcrowded with livestock. There came a period when people were curious enough to steal up and count the herd which grazed precariously on the steep hillside above the old farmhouse, and they could never find more than 10 or 12 anemic, bloodless-looking specimens. Wait, is it eating then, or is it a vampire? Evidently some blight or distemper, perhaps sprung from the unwholesome pasturage or the diseased fungi and timbers of the filthy barn, caused a heavy mortality amongst the Whately animals. Odd wounds or sores, having something of the aspect of incisions, seemed to afflict the visible cattle, and once or twice during the earlier months certain callers fancied they could discern similar scores about the throats of the gray unshaven man and his daughter. Okay, vampires, right? I don't know who's looking at that and not seeing vampires. They knew what vampires were in 17, wherever this is supposed to take, 18-something. Yeah, the cows are all disappearing and everyone is losing blood, but I'm sure it's fine. God damn. In the spring after Wilbur's birth, Lavinia resumed her customary rambles in the hills, bearing in her misproportioned arms the swarthy child. Going to go see Daddy, obviously. Public interest in the Whateleys subsided after most of the country folk had seen the baby, and no one bothered to comment on the swift development which that newcomer seemed every day to exhibit. Wilbur's growth was indeed phenomenal, for within 3 months of his birth he had attained a size and muscular power not usually found in infants under a full year of age. His motions, and even his vocal sounds, showed a restraint and deliberateness highly peculiar in an infant, and no one was really unprepared when, at 7 months, he began to walk unassisted, with falterings which another month was sufficient to remove. It was somewhat after this time, on Halloween, that a great blaze was seen at midnight on top of Sentinel Hill, where the old table-like stone stands amidst its tumulus of ancient bones. Considerable talk was started when Silas Bishop mentioned having seen the boy running sturdily up that hill ahead of his mother about an hour before the blaze was remarked. Why is some people going and celebrating Halloween remarkable? Like, oh no, they have a bonfire. Silas was rounding up a stray heifer, but he nearly forgot his mission when he fleetingly spied the two figures in the dim light of his lantern. They darted almost noiselessly through the underbrush, and the astonished watcher seemed to think they were entirely unclothed. Cool. Afterward, he could not be sure about the boy, who may have had some kind of fringed belt with a pair of dark blue trunks or trousers on. Wilbur was never subsequently seen alive and conscious without complete and tightly buttoned attire, the disagreement or threatened disarrangement of which always seemed to fill him with anger and alarm. His contrast with his squalid mother and grandfather in this respect was thought very notable until the horror of 1928 suggested the most valid of reasons. Heavy-handed foreshadowing. The next January gossips were mildly interested in the fact that Lavany's rat had commenced to talk, and at the age of only 11 months. His speech was somewhat remarkable both because of its difference from the ordinary accents of the region and because it displayed a freedom from infantile lisping of which many children of 3 or 4 might well be proud. The boy was not talkative, yet when he spoke he seemed to reflect some elusive element wholly unpossessed by Dunwich and its denizens. The strangeness did not reside in what he said, or even in the simple idioms he used, but seemed vaguely linked with his intonation, or with the internal organs that produced the spoken sounds. His facial aspect, too, was remarkable for its maturity, for though he shared his mother's and grandfather's chinlessness, his firm and precociously shaped nose united with the expression of his large, dark eyes to give him an air of quasi-adulthood and well-nigh preternatural intelligence. He was, however, exceedingly ugly despite his appearance of brilliancy, there being something almost goatish or animalistic about his thick lips, large-pored yellowish skin, coarse hair, and elongated ears. He was soon disliked even more decidedly than his mother and grandsire, and all conjectures about him were spiced with references to the bygone magic of old Whately, and how the hills once shook when he shrieked the dreadful name of Yog-Sothoth in the midst of a circle of stones, with a great book open in his arms before him. Dogs abhorred the boy, and he was always obliged to take various defensive measures against their barking menace. Okay, that is chapter 3. I'm going to take another sip of tea. This is a little harder to get through than the yellow wallpaper, just because, in this case, it's kind of the author who's a dick, as opposed to the character. Chapter 3. Meanwhile, old Whately continued to buy cattle without measurably increasing the size of his herd. He also cut timber and began to repair the unused parts of his house, a spacious peaked roof affair whose rear end was buried entirely in the rocky hillside, and whose 3 least ruined ground floor rooms had always been sufficient for himself and his daughter. There must have been some prodigious reserves of strength in the old man to enable him to accomplish so much labor, and though he still babbled lamentedly at times, his carpentry seemed to show the effects of sound calculation. It had really begun as soon as Wilbur was born, when one of the many tool sheds had been put suddenly in order, clapboarded and fitted with a stout fresh lock. Now, in restoring the abandoned upper story of the house, he was no less thorough craftsman. His mania showed itself only in his tight boarding up of all the windows in the reclaimed section, though many declared that it was a crazy thing to bother with the reclamation at all. Less inexplicable was his fitting up of another downstairs room for his new grandson, a room which several callers saw, though no one was ever admitted to the closely bordered upper story. This chamber he lined with tall, firm shelving, along which he began to gradually arrange, in apparently careful order, all the rotting ancient books and parts of books which during his own day had been heaped promiscuously in odd corners of the various rooms. Wow, okay, so a man's daughter has a kid, and he decides, you know what, I'm gonna fix the house up and make him a room and put all the books in this room so that we can, better solidify his education. And it's spun as, this horrible thing. Oh, how sinister for him to take care of his family. I mean, we all know that there's a monster in the shed, but, still. Okay, oh god, what voice did I use for Whately? Alright. I made some use of him, he would say as he tried to mend a torn black-letter page with paste prepared on the rusty kitchen stove. But the boy's fitting to make better use of him. He ought to have him as well, since they're going to be all of his learning. Yeah, see, he's trying to solidify his education. God, these people, so mean to Wilbur and his family. And his monster son-in-law. And his monster grandbaby. When Wilbur was a year and 7 months old, in September of 1914, his size and accomplishments were almost alarming. He had grown as large as a child of 4, and was a fluent and incredibly intelligent talker. He ran freely about the fields and hills, and accompanied his mother on all of her wanderings. At home he would pore diligently over the queer pictures and charts in his grandfather's books, while old Whately would instruct him through long, hushed afternoons. By this time, the restoration of the house was finished, and those who watched it wondered why one of the upper windows had been made into a solid plank door. It was a window in the rear of the east gable end, close against the hill, and no one could imagine why a cleated wooden runway was built up to it from the ground. What is weird about replacing a window with a door, and then having stairs leading up to said door? Everyone is like, oh, these people are so weird, and it's just like, they're just people. I mean, yeah, they do have a monster that's hidden in their house that they're feeding cows to and is drinking their blood, but they're just people. So rude. About the period of this work's completion, people noticed that the old tool house, tightly locked and windowless, clapboarded since Wilbur's birth, had been abandoned again. The door swung listlessly open, and when Earl Sawyer once stepped within after a cattle-selling call, he was disappointed by the singular odor he encountered. Such a stench, he averred, as he had never before smelt in all his life, and which could not come from anything sane or of this earth. But then, the homes and sheds of Dunwich folks have never been remarkable for olfactory immaculateness. Yeah, he's trying so hard to spin all of this as, like, weird when it's like, hey, their shed smells bad. Everyone's shed smells bad, by the way, but theirs smells different bad. The following months were void of visible events, save that everyone swore to a slow but steady increase in the mysterious hill noises. What are the mysterious hill noises? Are the mysterious hill noises just Lavinia visiting her husband? Because that would be hilarious. Oh, what's that sound? Oh, it sounds like tentacles for some reason. Whilst the following Halloween produced an underground rumbling clearly synchronized with bursts of flame from the summit of Sentinel Hill, Wilbur was growing up uncannily, so that he looked like a boy of 10 as he entered his 4th year. He read avidly by himself now, but talked much less than formerly. A settled taciturnity was absorbing him, and for the first time people began to speak specifically of the dawning look of evil in his goatish face. What does evil look like? Like, do they mean he's glowering at everyone and looks angry all the time, or are they going with, like, Disney evil, where you can always tell which character's the villain? Except in Frozen, I guess. I did not see that twist coming. Okay, let's see. Yeah, spoiler alert. Wilbur actually looks like the prince from Frozen. That's it. That's the canon now. Blah, 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 blah. Right, we were talking about him looking evil. There it is. He would sometimes mutter an unfamiliar jargon and chant in bizarre rhythms which chilled the listener with a sense of unexplainable terror. The aversion displayed toward him by dogs was now becoming a matter of wide remark, and he was obliged to carry a pistol in order to traverse the countryside in safety. His occasional use of the weapon did not enhance his popularity amongst the owners of canine guardians. I mean, what preteen boy didn't mutter weird things in hope of freaking out people? He's just a goth. He's a 4-year-old who's acting like he's, what did they say, 11? But, like, 11-year-olds are scary, so. The few callers at the house would often find Lavinia alone on the ground floor, while odd cries and footsteps resounded in the boarded-up second story. She would never tell what her father and the boy were doing up there, though once she turned pale and displayed an abnormal degree of fear when a fish peddler tried the locked door leading to the stairway. Yeah, 'cause that's rude. The peddler told the store loungers at Dunwich Village that he thought he heard a horse stamping on that floor above. The loungers reflected, thinking of the door and the runway, of the cattle that so swiftly disappeared. Then they shuddered as they recalled tales of old Whately's youth, and of the strange things that are called out of the earth when a bullock is sacrificed at the proper time to certain gods. It had for some time been noticed that dogs had begun to hate and fear the whole Whately place as violently as they hated and feared young Wilbur personally. In 1917 the war came, and Squire Sawyer Whately, as chairman of the local draft board, had hard work finding a quota of young Dunwich men fit even to be sent to a development camp. The government, alarmed, sent several officers and medical experts to investigate, conducting a survey which New England newspapers readers may still recall. It was the publicity attending this investigation which set reporters on the track of the Whateleys, and caused the Boston Globe and Arkham Advisor to print flamboyant Sunday stories of young Wilbur's precociousness, old Whately's black magic, and the shelves of strange books, the sealed second story of the ancient farmhouse, and the weirdness of the whole region and its hill noises. Wow, rude much? How? Like, these people are just trying to live their lives. You don't have to write articles just because their house is a little weird. Damn. Wilbur was 4.5 then, and looked like a lad of 15. They're lucky they did not draft him. His lip and cheek were fuzzy, with a coarse dark down, and his voice had begun to break. Earl Sawyer went out to the Whately place with both sets of reporters and cameramen, and called their attention to the queer stench which now seemed to trickle down from the sealed upper spaces. So rude! This poor family, they're just trying to live their lives. Ugh. Their elder god-worshipping lives. It was, he said, exactly like a smell he had found in the tool shed abandoned when the house was finally repaired, and like the faint odors which he thought he sometimes caught in stone circles on the mountains. Dunwich folks read the stories when they appeared and grinned over the obvious mistakes. They wondered, too, why the writers made so much of the fact that old Whately always paid for his cattle in gold pieces of extremely ancient date. Child support from Monster Daddy. The Whateleys had received their visitors with ill-concealed distaste, though they did not dare court further publicity by a violent resistance or refusal to talk. Well, yeah, I'd be distasteful too if people were harassing me about my home improvement in a way that was spinning it as some horrible thing. This entire story is trying to paint this family black, but it's like, they're just living their lives. So rude. Okay, we are going to read a little bit more. I'm going to read 2 more parts, and then I'm actually going to pause. For a decade, the annuals of the Whateleys sink indistinguishably into the general life of a morbid community, used to their queer ways and hardened to their May Eve and All Hallow orgies. See, what did I say about the hill sounds? That is exactly what is happening. And, I mean, everyone's acting like they're weird, but at least they're letting them get on with their, monster baby making. Twice a year they would light fires on the top of the Sentinel Hill, at which times the mountain rumblings would recur with greater and greater violence, while at all seasons there were strange importunous doings at the lonely farmhouse. In the course of time, callers professed to hear sounds in the sealed upper story even when all the family were downstairs, and they wondered how swiftly or how lingeringly a cow or bullock was usually sacrificed. There was talk of a complaint to the Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, but nothing ever came of it, since Dunwich folk are never anxious to call the outside world's attention to themselves. Can we talk about how funny it is to call, Can we talk about how funny it is to call PETA up for, animal sacrifices? Is it not funny? Is that just black humor? Okay. It's a little funny. Alright, about 1923, when Wilbur was a boy of 10, whose mind, voice, stature, and bearded face gave all the impressions of maturity, a second great siege of carpentry went on at the old house. It was all inside the sealed upper part, and from bits of discarded lumber, people concluded that the youth and his grandfather had knocked out all of the partitions and even removed the attic floor, leaving only one vast open void between the ground story and the peaked roof. Oh, that is going to be a nightmare to heat. I mean, I guess they have a monster in it to warm it up. I don't know if that monster put out heat, though. Oh, it sounds so snuggly. Okay. They had torn down the great central chimney, too, and fitted the rusty range with a flimsy outside tin stovepipe. In the spring after this event, old Whately noticed the growing number of whippoorwills that would come out of Cold Spring Glen to chirp under his window at night. He seemed to regard the circumstance as one of great significance, and told the loungers at Osborne's that he thought his time had almost come. "They whistle jest in tune with my breathin' now," he said, "and I guess they're gettin' ready to kitch my soul. They know it's a-goin' out, and don't calculate to miss it. You'll know, boys, after I'm gone, whether they get me or not. If they do, they'll keep up a-singin' and a-laughin' till break o' day. If they don't, they'll kind'll quiet down like. I expect them and the souls they hunts for have pretty tough tussles sometimes." And see, like, all of Whately's dialogue is just like, I don't know, there's something pleasant and folksy about it. I'm definitely on the Whately side of this. I don't know if you've noticed or not. All right. On Lammas night, 1924, Dr. Houghton of Aylesbury was hastily summoned by Wilbur Whately, who had lashed his one remaining horse through the darkness and telephoned from Osborne's in the village. He found old Whately in a very grave state, with a cardiac action and strenuous breathing that told of an end not far off. The daughter and oddly bearded grandson stood by the bedside, whilst from the vacant abyss overhead there came a disquieting suggestion of rhythmical surging or lapping, as of the waves on some level beach. The doctor, though, was cheerfully disturbed by the chattering night-birds outside, a seemingly limitless legion of whippoorwills that cried their endless message in repetition, timed diabolically to the wheezing gasps of the dying man. It was uncanny and unnatural, too much, thought Dr. Houghton, like the whole of the region he had entered so reluctantly in response to the urgent call. Toward 1 o'clock, old Whately gained consciousness and interrupted his wheezing to choke out a few words to his grandson. "More space, Willie, more space soon. Ye grow, and that grows faster. It'll be ready to sarve you soon, boy. Open up the gates to Yog-Sothoth with one long chant you'll find on page 751 of the complete edition, and then put a match to the prison. Fire from off can burn it now." He was obviously quite mad. Yeah, you're dying and you give your grandson homework. Very specific homework, too. Page 751 of your textbook, boy. Okay, he was obviously quite mad. After a pause, during which the flock of whippoorwills outside adjusted their cries to the altered tempo, while some indications of the strange hill noises came from far off, he added another sentence or two. "Feed it regular, Willie, and mind the quantity, but don't let it grow too fast for the place, for if it bursts quarters and gets out afore you opens to Yog-Sothoth, it's all over and no use. Only them from beyond can make it multiply and work. Only them the old uns as wants to come back." But speech gave place to gasps again, and Lavinia screamed at the way the whippoorwills followed the change. It was the same for more than an hour, when the final throaty rattle came. Dr. Houghton drew shrunken lids over the glazing gray eyes as the tumult of birds faded imperceptibly to silence. Lavinia sobbed, but Wilbur only chuckled whilst the hill noises rumbled faintly. "They didn't get him," he muttered in his heavy bass voice. Wilbur was by this time a scholar of really tremendous erudition in his one-sided way, and was quietly known by correspondence to many librarians in distant places where rare and forbidden books of old days are kept. He was more and more hated and dreaded around Dunwich because of certain youthful disappearances which suspicion laid vaguely at his door, but was always able to silence inquiry through fear or through use of that fund of old-time gold which still as his grandfather's time went forth regularly and increasingly for cattle buying. He was now tremendously mature of aspect, and his height, having reached the normal adult limit, seemed inclined to wax beyond that figure. In 1925, when a scholarly correspondent from Miskatonic University called upon him one day and departed pale and puzzled, he was fully 6 3/4 feet tall. "Oh, so he's a big monster. Through all the years, Wilbur had treated his mother with a growing contempt, finally forbidding her to go to the hills with him on May Eve and Hallowmass. And in 1926 the poor creature complained to Mammy Bishop of being afraid of him. "There's more about him as I knows that I can tell you, Mammy," said she, "and nowadays there's more nor what I know myself. I vow before God I don't know what he wants, nor what he's a-trying to do." Did they keep Lavinia? Did Wilbur and his grandfather keep Lavinia, out of the plot? Is she just this poor woman who, fell in love with a monster, and then her son forbid her to go and visit her monster husband, and... Poor Lavinia. Oh, best girl. Okay. That Halloween, the hill noises sounded louder than ever, and fire burned on Sentinel Hill as usual, but people paid more attention to the rhythmical screaming of vast flocks of unnaturally belated whippoorwills, which seemed to be assembled near the unlighted Whately farmhouse. After midnight, their shrill notes burst into a kind of pandemic cacophony, which filled all the countryside, and not until dawn did they finally quiet down. Then they vanished, hurrying southward where they were fully a month overdue. What this meant no one could quite be certain till later. None of the country folk seemed to have died, but poor Lavinia Whately was never seen again. I like to think that the whippoorwills just brought her to her husband. Yeah, that's the theory that I'm going to work with, that just she hadn't been to see him, and he was like, "Where are you?" "Oh, my son's being a dick." "Okay, well, go and fetch my lady." So she's just happy in another dimension with her monster hubby. Yes. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. In the summer of 1927, Wilbur repaired 2 sheds in the farmyard and began moving his books and effects out to them. Soon afterward, Earl Sawyer told the loungers at Osborne's that more carpentry was going on in the Whately farmhouse. Wilbur was closing all the doors and windows on the ground floor, and seemed to be taking out partitions as his grandfather had done upstairs 4 years ago. He was living in one of the sheds, and Sawyer thought he seemed unusually worried and tremulous. People generally suspected him of knowing something about his mother's disappearance, and very few ever approached his neighborhood now. His height had increased to more than 7 feet, and showed no signs of ceasing its development. I know, he's so tall now. Okay. Okay, one more part. The following winter brought an event no less strange than Wilbur's first trip outside of the Dunwich region. Correspondents of the Widener Library at Harvard, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, the British Museum, and the University of Buenos Aires, and the Library of Miskatonic University at Arkham had failed to get him the loan of the book he desperately wanted. So at length he set out in person, shabby, dirty, bearded, and uncouth of dialect, to consult the copy at Miskatonic, which was the nearest to him geographically. Almost 8 feet tall, and carrying a cheap new valise from Osborne's general store, this goatish gargoyle appeared one day in Arkham in quest of the dreaded volume kept under lock and key at the college library. The hideous Necronomicon, as printed in Spain in the 17th century. He had never seen a city before, but he had no thought save to find his way to the university grounds, where, indeed, he passed heedlessly by the great white-fanged watchdog that barked with unnatural fury and enmity, and tugged frantically at its stout chain. Wilbur had with him the priceless but imperfect copy of Dr. Dee's English version, which his grandfather had bequeathed him, and upon receiving access to the Latin copy, he at once began to collate the 2 texts, with the aim of discovering a certain passage which would have come on the 751st page of his own defective volume. This much he could not civilly refrain from telling the librarian, the same erudite Henry Armitage, A.M. Miskatonic, Ph.D., Princeton, Literature D. Johns Hopkins, who had once called at the farm, and who now politely plied him with questions. He was looking, he had to admit, for a kind of formula or incantation containing the frightful name Yog-Sothoth. I feel like I'm mispronouncing that name every time, which is fine. And it puzzled him to find discrepancies, duplications, and ambiguities which made the matter of determination far from easy. As he copied the formula he finally chose, Dr. Armitage looked involuntarily over his shoulder at the open pages, the left-hand one of which, in the Latin version, contained such monstrous threats to the peace and sanity of the world. Nor is it to be thought, ran the text as Armitage mentally translated it, that man is either the oldest or the last of earth's masters, or that the common bulk of life and substance walks alone. The old ones were, the old ones are, and the old ones shall be. Not in the spaces we know, but between them, they walk serene and primal, undimensioned and to us unseen. Yog-Sothoth knows the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and the guardian of the gate. Past, present, future, all are one in Yog-Sothoth. He knows where the old ones broke through of old, and where they shall break through again. He knows where they have trod earth's fields, and where they still tread them, and why no one can behold them as they tread. By their smell can men sometimes know them near, but of their semblance can no man know, saving only in the features of those they have begotten on mankind. And of those there are many sorts, differing in likeness from man's truest eidolon to the shape without sight or substance which is they. They walk unseen and foul in lonely places, where the words have been spoken and the rites howled through at their seasons. The wind gibbers with their voices, and the earth mutters with their consciousness. They bend the forest and crush the city, yet may not forest or city behold the hand that smites. Cadence in the cold waste hath known them, and what man knows Cadence? The ice desert of the south and the sunken isles of ocean hold stones wherein their seal is engraven. But who hath seen the deep frozen city, or the sealed tower long garlanded with seaweed and barnacles? Great Cthulhu is their cousin, yet can he spy them only dimly. Eashab-nigrath, as a foulness shall ye know them. Their hand is at your throats, yet ye see them not, and their habitation is even one with your garden threshold. Yog-Sothoth is the key to the gate, whereby the spheres meet. Man rules now where they ruled once. They shall soon rule where man rules now. After summer is winter, and after winter summer. They wait patient and potent, for here shall they reign again. I like how the first half of that was just like, hey, so, in case you were wondering, Wilbur is definitely Elder God spawn, and his twin is probably invisible. Is it weird that the Elder Gods are invisible? Because I thought that, like, you could see them and then go crazy. Weird. Guess we'll find out. Dr. Armitage, associating what he was reading with what he had heard of Dunwich and its brooding presence of Wilbur Whately and his dim, hideous aura that stretched from a dubious birth to a cloud of probable matricide, felt a wave of fright as tangible as a draught of the tomb's cold clamminess. The bent, goatish giant before him seemed like the spawn of another planet or dimension, like something only partly of mankind, and linked to black gulfs of essence and entity that stretched like titan phantasms beyond all spheres of force, matter, space, and time. Finally, someone puts the clues together. Like, this whole thing has been like, obvious red flag, obvious red flag, obvious red flag, and then finally this guy gets it. Okay. Presently, Wilbur raised his head and began speaking in that strange, resonant fashion which hinted at sound-producing organs unlike the run of mankind's. "Mr. Armitage," said he, "I calculate I've got to take that book home. There's things in it I've got to try under certain conditions that I can't get here, and it'd be a mortal sin to let red tape rule hold me up. Let me take it along, sir, and I'll swear there won't nobody know the difference. I don't need to tell you I'll keep good care of it. It wasn't me that put this D copy in the shape it is." He stopped as he saw firm denial on the librarian's face, and his own goatish features grew crafty. Armitage, half ready to tell him he might make a copy of what parts he needed, thought suddenly of the possible consequences and checked himself. There was too much responsibility in giving such a being the key to such blasphemous outer spheres. Whately saw how things stood, and tried to answer lightly. "Well, all right, if you feel that way about it. Maybe Harvard won't be so fussy as you be. and without saying more he rose and strode out of the building, stooping at each doorway. Armitage heard the savage yelping of the great watchdog and studied Whately's gorilla-like lope as he crossed the bit of campus visible from the window. He thought of the wild tales he had heard and recalled the old Sunday stories in the Advisor. These things, and the lore he had picked up from the Dunwich rustics and villagers during his one visit there, unseen things not of the earth, or at least not of tri-dimensional earth, rushed, fetid and horrible things, New England's glens, and brooded obscenely on the mountain-tops. Of this he had long felt certain. Now he seemed to sense the close presence of some terrible part of the intruding horror, to glimpse a hellish advance in the black dominion of the ancient and once passive nightmare. He locked away the Necronomicon with a shudder of disgust, but the room still reeked of an unholy and unidentifiable stench. "As a foulness shall ye know them," he quoted. Yes, the odor was the same as that which had sickened him at the Whately farmhouse less than 3 years before. He thought of Wilbur, goatish and ominous once again, and laughed mockingly at the village rumors of his parentage. "Inbreeding," Armitage muttered half aloud to himself. "Great God, what simpletons! Show them Arthur McCain's great god Pan, and they'll think it a common Dunwich scandal. But what thing, what cursed shapeless influence on or of this three-dimensional earth was Wilbur Whately's father, born on Candlemas, 9 months after May Eve of 1912, when talk about the queer earth noises reached clear to Arkham? What walked on the mountains that May night? What rudeness horror fastened itself on the world in half-human flesh and blood?" Kinky. Also brood. What a rude thing to say about Wilbur's father. Brood. During the ensuing weeks, Dr. Armitage set about to collect all possible data on Wilbur Whately and the formless presence around Dunwich. He got in communications with Dr. Houghton of Aylesbury, who had attended old Whately in his last illness, and found much to ponder over in the grandfather's last words as quoted by the physician. A visit to Dunwich village failed to bring out much that was new, but a close survey of the Necronomicon, in whose parts which Wilbur had sought so avidly, seemed to supply new and terrible clues to the nature, methods, and desires of the strange evil so vaguely threatening this planet. Talks with several students of archaic lore in Boston, and letters to many others elsewhere, gave him a growing amazement which passed slowly through various degrees of alarm to a state of really acute spiritual fear. As the summer drew on, he felt dimly that something ought to be done about the lurking terrors of the upper Miskatonic Valley, and about the monstrous being known to the human world as Wilbur Whately. Okay, we are going to end it here. The next will be continued in part 2. I didn't realize how long this story was, so we're going to have to definitely cut it. I hope you enjoyed the story so far, and yeah, let's find out what happens to Wilbur next time. Have a good one, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye.